Hey guys, so in my last video I talked a little bit about the collective consciousness mitosis, but I didn't really go into detail about it. I was mainly just showing footage of the plasma fires, so I want to get into the separation of the higher collective consciousness and the lower collective consciousness, but I'll put a link to that video in the description if you haven't seen it yet. It's called The Proof is All Around You, Plasma Fires, Mitosis of the Collective Consciousness. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about was actually from a download I got for a chart. I went to use the bathroom, was thinking about something totally random. I think I was trying to figure out what I wanted to eat or something. But I stepped back out of the bathroom and the download hit me. It came so fast, I literally had to like scribble it all down on a piece of paper to try to translate everything out as much as I could. And you'll see a bunch of lines on top of what I wrote because this was just the rough draft. So when I made the final draft, I had to cross things out as I added them to the final draft to keep track of everything, if that makes sense. Anyways, I want to show you guys a chart that shows the breakdown of the different types of meanings behind the retrocausality language. And for anyone who's new to my channel, I mainly do videos on how to tune into the language that comes from the future that I've started calling the retrocausality language. It's basically, I guess for lack of a better term, a kind of frequency that gets overlaid on top of certain things to convey higher universal truths through archetypes. There is something about the creative process behind different forms of art that makes it easier for the retrocausality language to be heard through it. I think it's because consciousness is the driving force behind the creativity. And really, that's what art is. It wouldn't exist if consciousness weren't there to create it. And when I say art, I'm not talking about like only visual art. Things like movie plots and songs are all considered a form of art. And what I'm finding is song is one of the main things the retrocausality language uses to communicate messages. But there's all kinds of different ways it communicates, though. Synchronicities is another way it tries to get our attention. And I'll go into detail later on in this video about why I call it the retrocausality language. But anyways, Earth is going through a form of mitosis where it's dividing into two, kind of like how a cell would. And this isn't necessarily like a literal physical division where the ground splits in half, but this mitosis is why all this polarization is going on. The people who choose to stay asleep and stay rooted to the materialistic world will stay in this old earth cell. We'll call them the lower collective consciousness. Now, the people who choose to put in the work to get on that higher frequency will go through a spiritual awakening process. And those are the people who will merge with the new earth cell. Those people won't stay rooted in this lower collective consciousness earth because they'll choose to mentally and emotionally separate themselves from the old earth cell. Those are the people who will make up the higher collective consciousness. So the main difference between New Earth and Old Earth is the level of connection a person feels to Source or God. On New Earth, there'll be a lightness where God's unconditional love is felt, not necessarily by everyone around you, but felt within yourself. In fact, most people around you will start to look like the Walking Dead, But that won't matter. It'll be scary at first. Trust me, it'll be scary at first, but that won't matter because you'll just feel so good inside. So, as of right now, New Earth and Old Earth people will still be in the same space. So, you could be on New Earth, but the person sitting next to you could be on Old Earth. And that may change in the future, though. I mean, I don't know if we'll always be surrounded by these people during this life. I don't know the exact mechanics behind this separation, but the feelings on Old Earth are basically the opposite of New Earth, though. Old Earth feels heavy, like there's this impending sense of doom or apathy that's always in the background. And for anyone who's kind of unsure about this mitosis analogy, I want to read a real quick just a reply I made to someone who left a comment about the cell division model being too dualistic. I said, quote, "I agree that our true nature is consciousness. Being aware of being aware, i.e., being conscious of the consciousness, is key, like you said. The spiritual cellular division that I mentioned isn't an exact model of human cellular division because it doesn't mirror the way physical cells create the exact same cell it divided from. The earth cellular division I speak of represents a form of a birthing process in a way. Even though the model doesn't fully mirror human physical cellular division, I find the model useful in that it still upholds the concept of non-duality. Here's how. On a relative level, you could say separate cells exist, but on an absolute level, the cells make up God or source, so technically there's no two on an absolute level. An analogy would be like how an individual's body is composed of many cells, yet there is no division because there is no line of separation between that person's cells and their body. But rebirth slash cellular division slash bifurcation, or whatever label you want to give that process, still exists within the body on a relative level," unquote. So I just wanted to read that to clear up any questions you guys might have on that. And there's a lot of different models, actually. There's a lot of different models and names you can give this process. Biblically, some people refer to it as the separation of the wheat and tares. It really doesn't matter what name you give it. It's all referring to the same thing. And this isn't the chart I got of the download. This is an older one, but you're either part of the lower collective consciousness or the higher collective consciousness. And depending on where you're at on the emotional frequency spectrum at any given moment, you have access to different levels of understanding. The more your frequency matches a love frequency, the more you're able to sync your frequency up to God's frequency. And that's where you're going to be able to tap into those universal truth messages. And this emotional frequency scale, it actually coincides with DNA activation. But I don't want to go too deep into that because I don't want this video to be too long. This is probably already going to be a longer video. But I'll put a link in the description to a video called Secrets Encoded in DNA, Vax Retrocausality, DNA Activation, if anyone's interested. But for this chart that I got the download for, I want to focus specifically on song, because for me, because I can only speak for myself, for me, song is one of the main things the retrocausality language uses to communicate higher truths. Now, for anyone who isn't familiar with the retrocausality language, I'm going to play 2 songs at the end of this video just to give you guys a chance to tune into the retrocausality language yourself. Like, don't take my word for this. Don't take my word for this or anything I'm saying. The best proof is through your own direct experience with it. But some people think it's our higher self sending the messages back to us from the future, and some people think it's God or source. Personally, I think it's a combination of both, but I'll let you guys just decide that for yourself when you do the exercise at the end of this video. But basically, the retrocausality language is a language that's used to describe the indescribable. I think it's safe to say that God and God's infinite, unconditional love falls into that category. Now, the retrocausality language is so intelligent that it can use archetypes and wordplay to convey those higher universal truths in a way that we can understand. But unless we tune into the retrocausality language, we won't be able to pick up on the messages, and it'll never ever violate your free will and make you hear it. So the easiest way to tune into it is to raise your emotional frequency up as high as you can. So the more you focus on God's love as you're listening to the music, the more access you have to hearing messages of the higher collective consciousness, aka New Earth. Now, on the opposite end of the emotional frequency spectrum, people who are connected to the lower collective consciousness, they won't hear the retrocausality language because their emotional frequency is so low that it doesn't give them access to it. So once we can train ourselves to ignore the distractions and negative theatrics of the lower collective consciousness, we can mentally and emotionally disconnect from the lower collective consciousness. But I get it, like it's not easy sometimes because all that low frequency stuff is like a magnet. It's like that by design. It's like a magnet that can pull you down into that heaviness. But once you're able to burst through that low frequency barrier line, you could have access to hearing communication from the retrocausality language. And RL on the chart just stands for retrocausality language, by the way. But until a person is able to do that, the meaning behind songs will only reflect concepts related to the lower collective consciousness earth. So for the lower collective consciousness meanings level, at best, the lyrics will have superficial, empty meanings. So like it'll sound like it's only talking about the romantic love between two humans, and it'll seem like it has nothing to do with God's love or even just God at all. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, the lyrics will seem like they're referring to mainly negative and nefarious things. Basically, the meaning behind the song will reflect ideas rooted in the paradigms of this matrix. Now, if you're able to ignore the lower collective consciousness song meanings and focus on God's love, then you can tune into the retrocausality language and rise above the red. In a way, it's like thinning the veil for God's voice to come through all that static that had been blocking it out before when you were down there. The telltale sign that you punctured the veil is you'll start to hear bits and pieces in the song that seem like it's being sung to you by God. And you'll get really personalized messages from God. And I know that sounds very crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. It's just an inner knowing. When you hear a line in the song that says, I love you in the lyrics, you'll have this feeling inside that it's not an I love you being said about a human romantic relationship. It's like the human artist who's singing the song disappears, and it's just you and God. It's just you and God having a conversation, even though the singer's voice is being used as a vessel to say the words, if that makes sense. I don't know the mechanics or mechanisms behind how that happens, but it just happens. Okay, so I call the middle level of this chart the escape key messages level. I know everyone's different, but for me, this is how the retrocausality language started to introduce itself to me. I'd be listening to the music, and every now and then a specific line would pop out as having a deeper meaning. And immediately I knew the source of that communication was benevolent, because I know this is going to sound kind of strange, but it started giving me instructions on how to raise my frequency higher. I call it spiritual survival instructions. And there were so many times when the retrocausality language would even communicate guidance about keeping my body healthy in order to help it become a vessel for God's light. So, for example, countless songs about drinking or whiskey got decoded for me. Once the retrocausality language gets overlaid on top of the lyrics, it changes from a lower level literal meaning about alcohol to a reference about drinking water. So like for me, for example, the song Brandy by Looking Glass, with that song, the word brandy turned into a reference for drinking more water. It gave me instructions to stay hydrated with water, aka brandy, to detox my body. It's almost like it was saying you have to detox your body in order to get intoxicated from God's love. And trust me, once you get high enough up, it feels like this intoxicating love bliss. There's nothing in this world that can compare to it. So, the escape key level is about the retrocausality language giving guidance. One of the ways it does this is by asking questions through the lyrics to get us to exercise our free will. I think the main reason it asks questions is to try to get us to consciously make the decision to choose between love and fear. And another way it gives guidance is by telling us the truth. It tells us the truth of where we're at. It's very honest with you. Like it tells you up front in so many different ways through the lyrics that this world it's a world of illusion. It's a world of duality, and basically we're in the middle of a spiritual war on a relative level. Now, on an absolute level, as you get higher up in the chart, it'll tell you there is no spiritual war, because the spiritual war, it's already been won. And all winning the spiritual war is just returning to a higher state of consciousness. But that's only once you get up to the new earth, higher collective consciousness level. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but the escape key meaning level will not only tell you about the Maya that is this world, it'll make a concession to our human paradigm and basically let us know about environmental earth changes going on. So like things going on with the sky or the sun, the clouds. The retrocausality language will affirm to you that no, you aren't crazy for seeing the anomalies going on with the moon and other things in nature. You ever notice how there's so many songs that mention the moon? I don't think that's a coincidence. The fact that the moon is tilting in weird directions and shines way brighter, and all these other anomalies going on with the sky, those are earth changes that signal the end of one age and the beginning of another. And yeah, it's not pleasant to learn these things, but it's what we need to know to shake us awake. When you see these things happening to the earth and hear about it through the retrocausality language, it serves as a warning to motivate us to keep moving closer to God. Now, what sets the escape key level warnings apart from the lower collective consciousness meanings is its frequency. If the song message you're getting is fear-based, then it's coming from the lower collective consciousness level. And you'll know because the messages will literally make you feel afraid or like you're being threatened or something. So when that happens, just use your discernment to ignore that lower collective consciousness meaning and go back to focusing on God's love song. But just remember, any song meaning that comes from the lower collective consciousness ultimately isn't valid and doesn't hold any real spiritual meaning. Once you cross over the line that separates the lower collective consciousness meaning level from the escape key level, the song message will start to transmit universal truths. Now, as you move up the escape key level, the line between that level and the New Earth higher collective consciousness level will start to blur. That's why a lot of time the retrocausality language will transmit both escape key meanings and New Earth higher collective consciousness meanings all in the same one line. And like I said, it can give very personalized messages that change based on what level of consciousness you're at when you hear the song. I mean, some of these messages are so personal. There's some messages I'll probably never share online because I know some of them are meant to be kept private. But yeah, there's actually no clear-cut line that separates the top two levels. It's not like the solid, well-defined border that separates the lower collective consciousness from the escape key level. And with the escape key level and lower collective consciousness level, it's a matter of choosing to focus on love or fear that's going to determine the meaning that you get in the song. But I think the reason why there's not a solid line of division between the escape key level and the New Earth higher collective consciousness level is because once you rise above the lower collective consciousness, technically it's all higher collective consciousness. It's just there's different levels of meaning encoded within the higher collective consciousness. In other words, both meaning levels have access to the retrocausality language. The lower collective consciousness level, though, that has zero access to the retrocausality language, though. No ears to hear. And the more of that love frequency you focus on while you're listening to the music, the higher the song meanings become. That's how you rise above the escape key level. And once you do that, the transmissions start to tell you through the music that you've used your escape key to open the door to New Earth. And what New Earth is new consciousness. It's a higher state of consciousness where you feel fully connected with God. It's beyond words. It's not just, oh, I feel love in my heart. No, it's an altered state of consciousness that's impossible to accurately describe with human words. It comes and goes in waves. I call it a Christ consciousness wave because I don't know what else to call that kind of expansion. It's beyond what we call an emotion, but since we don't have a word to describe it, I'll call it an emotion of unconditional love and ecstasy. But it's so much more than that. It's also a literal physical sensation in your body that feels like a weightless expansion. All I know is when I'm in it, nothing else matters but God. My memory gets affected, and I can't even remember any of my frustrations or worries. And time changes too. That's why I can never tell the duration of a Christ consciousness wave, because I lose my ability to measure time the same. And I know that state of consciousness was the way God always made us to be. Christ consciousness is supposed to be our normal state of consciousness. That's the state of consciousness we were in back when we lived in our real home. We only think the lower collective consciousness state is normal because we fell into a state of amnesia when we were born, and we forgot what it was like to always be in a higher state. And everyone around us doesn't remember either. It's kind of like the movie The Giver. If you haven't seen the movie The Giver, please watch it. I'll put a link to a trailer in the description. But there's some really strong retrocausality messages in that movie. But some of us are starting to remember New Earth. Now, on the New Earth level, which is the higher collective consciousness, the song messages are more simplistic, and that they're mainly only about God saying, I love you. All the dualistic concepts that were used as helpful tools in the escape key meaning level just kind of fade away. And all that's left are song messages related to the one love. On the New Earth higher collective consciousness level, the retrocausality language transmits the countless ways God tells us how much He loves us through the lyrics. I think that's the real reason why humans invented the term love song. Even humans rooted in the lower collective consciousness use the term love song. I think it's because probably on a subconscious level, we've always known that there's something spiritual about music. I mean, why were we always told that angels sing in heaven? I think there's something about the sound wave frequencies or the harmonies or something about it that somehow makes it easier to transmit God's love. Somehow, I don't know. I'm telling you though, after enough time of training yourself to move up to the higher levels of meaning, you can experience Christ consciousness through the music. There's been times when I listen to the music and I feel so much love and expansion. It's unbelievable. You wouldn't believe me. You would not believe me if there was a way I could describe it to you verbally. The only way you could understand and know it was even real is if you merged with it too. And when I get to that level, it just feels like merging with the God ocean, and it's like riding on the consciousness arc. And for anyone who's not familiar with the consciousness arc, I'll put a link in the description called Two Singularities Occurring Simultaneously follow-up video for anyone who's interested in the God ocean or the consciousness arc topic. But like I said, I'm gonna play 2 songs at the end of this video so you can tune in to the retrocausality language and see if you can move up to a higher level on the chart. And you'll know how close or far away you are from the New Earth higher collective consciousness level based on what you're able to decode. So like, for example, say you're listening to a song and you hear the lyrics mention the words crying or tears. In that moment, while you're hearing the song, if your focus is rooted in the lower collective consciousness, then all you're going to hear is a line about tears and crying related to something going on with a human romantic relationship. Now, if you've elevated your focus above the superficial, lower collective consciousness meaning level, then the word tears in the song will turn into a reference for crying about something related to your spiritual journey. But see, in the escape key level, the word tears may not necessarily be a reference to happy tears. It could be tears related to spiritual persecution or something else related to your soul's evolution. Now, once you transcend the escape key level and move up to the higher level in the chart by focusing on God's love as you're listening to the music, once you start to penetrate the new earth, higher collective consciousness level, you'll find the words crying and tears only relates to tears of joy. Tears of joy about reuniting with God. But before I play these two songs, I want to show you guys some of the transmissions I got from the retrocausality language when I was listening to them. So the first song mentions the word till, T-I-L-L. Now the official lyrics actually spell it that way instead of the normal way that we all remember, but I'll get to that in a minute. When the retrocausality language got layered on top of it, till, T-I-L-L, stood out as a reference to the holy harvest or the separation of the wheat and tares. Because a till, T-I-L-L, till, is actually a tool that's used to harvest crops, i.e. till the land. The retrocausality language changed it into a metaphor for tilling the mind in order to prepare for the holy harvest of new earth. And so one of the ways we till the mind is by pruning or cutting off the negative thoughts that lower our emotional frequency. Because when our frequency is low, we can't feel that love vibration that makes us feel connected to God. So tilling the mind is quieting the mind to be present in the here and now instead of constantly thinking in thoughts about the past or the future. Because it's only in the now that we can be present with God. But like I said earlier, just a side note, the word till, T-I-L-L, as a grammatically correct contraction for the word until, seems to be a Mandela effect. According to the English language, till, T-I-L-L, is considered a grammatically correct contraction for until. Now, for me and a lot of people in school, we were taught the shortened version of until is apostrophe T-I-L, not T-I-L-L. The way it is now, first of all, there's no apostrophe, and second, why would an extra L automatically get added just because it's a contraction? So yeah, that's a funny Mandela effect to me. And what's funny is the Mandela affected version of that word actually makes more sense when it's used with the retrocausality language. But anyways, both the songs mention the word sun, S-U-N, which morphed to reflect an escape key meaning and a new earth higher collective consciousness meaning. So when sun, S-U-N, took on the new earth higher collective consciousness meaning, it changed to son, S-O-N, as in son or daughter of God. And there's even a line in one of the songs that says, quote, won't know till the sun comes up again, unquote. Now, tell me why, while I was finishing up writing down the chart download, tell me why that line started to play on the radio over and over again. So that was kind of a funny synchronicity. I'm writing down a chart about how to raise your consciousness, and then I hear the radio saying, won't know till the sun comes up again, won't know till the sun comes up again. Like, it said it 5 times in a row. But yeah, so the new earth higher collective consciousness meaning was basically saying that a child of God won't know the higher meanings behind the music or really any of the retrocausality language transmissions until the mind is tilled or trained to move up to higher states of consciousness again. And then the other transmission was about how the sun anomalies and other earth changes can serve as a means to wake us up to the end of this age and the beginning of a new one in terms of mankind's spiritual evolution. So the second meaning was basically talking about when sun anomalies come up again, then a child of God knows it's time to awaken to a higher state of consciousness again. And I know I keep saying this, but before we were born, we lived in a higher state of consciousness. And the word again at the end of that song line was a reference to the cyclic nature of Earth. And in a way, you could say our own spiritual journey is cyclic, because we existed in a higher state of consciousness, then we fell into a lower state of consciousness when we were born, and now we're starting to return to a higher state of consciousness. We no longer have to wait to die to experience a higher state of consciousness. And over time, the Christ consciousness waves are only going to get stronger. I can promise you that. But there's different parts in the song that mention things like, quote, how it used to be, unquote, or like I said before, it also mentions the word again. Those both stood out as references to the retrocausal spiritual time loop. And I say retrocausal because retrocausality is when something happens in the future that has such a huge impact on consciousness that it ripples back and affects its own past. So it's like a self-sustaining time loop where the future event of us reuniting with God is what ripples back to influence our present day, which is also considered the past from the perspective of the future event. And the retrocausality language is a part of those ripples from the future. For anyone who's not familiar with my other videos, I've started calling this reunion with God the spiritual singularity, or simply just the singularity. And I'm not talking about anything involving the technological singularity. I think it goes without saying that the people who merge with the tech singularity won't be merging with the spiritual singularity. And I say will merge, but really it's already happened, because it's that future event that's causing the acceleration towards it in the first place, if that makes sense. And time is really an illusion, and there's only really God's now. Everything is happening in God's now, but I still use the retrocausality model just because it helps us understand the so-called cause and effect relationship. But the word up in the song morphed into a metaphor for a higher state of consciousness that's closer to God. And the retrocausality language changed the word highway into two words, so high and way. And just like with the word up, the word high took on the same meaning. And the homophone C, S-E-A, got changed into an archetype for the consciousness art. And that all goes back to what I was saying earlier about merging with the God ocean when we experience a Christ consciousness wave. Now, the retrocausality language also attached a double meaning of C, S-E-E, to convey a reference to having spiritual sight. And the word in got decoded to mean going inside your heart within your own God center instead of focusing on the so-called external material world. Um, then there's multiple lines in the second song that mentions the words gone, goes, going, which changed into escape key level instructions about leaving a lower state of consciousness to merge with the Christ consciousness of New Earth. And I'm not going to decode everything just because I don't want this video to be too long. The word on got changed to escape key level instructions to turn your mind on in order to tune into the retrocausality language and Christ consciousness. Now, this doesn't mean turn your mind on to start thinking really hard. On just means the opposite of off, or the opposite of being asleep. So being on is like being awake or open to receiving the messages. Kind of like how you turn a radio receiver on. But the part in the song that mentions the word Carolina, that instantly morphed into Carolina, as in like a care line or a telephone line. And the retrocausality language transmitted that a telephone line is a root archetype that represents a means of communication between the higher spiritual realm and this realm. Now, with the song line that mentions the name Karen, forget about all the lower level, lower collective consciousness meaning they just attached to that name. Karen translated to care and end, and on the escape key level, that name was giving instructions about care and love being found when one goes in their heart to reach their God center. Now, from the New Earth higher collective consciousness level, the retrocausality language conveyed that any song line that mentions a female or woman's name is a metaphor for Mother Earth, aka New Earth. So basically, a woman's name in the lyrics 9 times out of 10 is reminding us that each of us, well, not everyone, but the people who merge with the spiritual singularity, each of us is a piece of the new earth. We are Caroline. We are Karen. We're the new earth higher collective consciousness. That's the same lady the Little River Band was singing about in my other video. And I'll put a link in the description to that Little River Band video. But the words morning and today in the second song got decoded to mean a time of spiritual awakening. The word long changed from being about a long time to being about a longing for more love. And there's a line that says, quote, "Sometimes I wish I never had my say." That stood out as really saying, I wish the ego never had a say. And I'm almost done decoding, then I'll play these 2 songs. There's some lines that mentions the word crying and tears, which I know we already talked about. For me, because I can only speak for myself, for me, those words were references to tears of joy. So like tears of joy when we realize that our true identity is a soul that's not separated from God. Because we're not really our body or a human ego. We're a soul with a body that's having a temporary human experience. But the last thing I want to decode is the line that says, quote, "Hey babe, the sky's on fire, I'm dying, ain't I?" unquote. That line transmitted both escape key and New Earth higher collective consciousness meanings. For the New Earth higher collective consciousness meaning, the word sky changed to a metaphor for a place where a higher state of consciousness is experienced, and the word fire turned into a metaphor for God's passion and love for his children. And then we already went over what the word on got decoded as. But on the higher meaning level, the line was basically saying our false ego identity as someone who's separated from God is dying. And what's causing that false identity to slowly but surely die is the repeated practice of turning the mind on to see the love and passion that God has for us. Once that fiery passion is realized, a higher state of consciousness occurs naturally. Now, on the escape key meaning level, the words sky and fire didn't translate into metaphors. The line got decoded to mean changes witnessed with the sky, as well as fire serves as a means to wake us up to the beginning of a new era or age. And accepting these earth changes helps dissolve the false ego identity as someone who's separated from God. So yeah, it's like a part of us is dying. Our old paradigms are dying too. This isn't an easy process. Like it's a lot easier just to say blind and deaf, but we're not doing that. I mean, as far as the sky goes, we're seeing everything from the rainbow rings around the sun to the moon tilting and looking extra bright. I mean, there's countless things going on with the sun. I'm not gonna go into too much detail about the sky changes just because there's too many to name. But I will say the sky itself looks huge and expanded, like everything's in close-up HD form. Now, the fire thing could represent a lot of anomalies going on with the earth, like plasma fires, the huge increase in the frequency of fireballs or meteorites in the sky. But notice how the line asks at the end, I'm dying, ain't I? Like I said earlier, with the escape key meaning level, a lot of times the retrocausality language will give guidance in the form of a question to remind us to choose between love and fear. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and play these two songs. Just keep in mind the retrocausality language is trying to describe the indescribable. So it won't always use a human form of proper grammar. Plus, depending on where you're at on the emotional frequency wave spectrum, that's going to play a role in what level of the retrocausality language you're able to tune into. And like I always say, the retrocausality language uses archetypes and metaphors to reflect your soul's unique journey. So that's why two people hearing the exact same song can decode different messages. And you know, sometimes the retrocausality language doesn't even need to use metaphors or wordplay. It just says it. The main way it communicates is by changing who is singing the song to you. In other words, it creates an inner knowing that, you know, right there in that moment as you're hearing the song, the artist disappears and the song is no longer about a human singing a song to another human. The retrocausality language changes it to where the lyrics sound like it's a higher love talking to you through the song. You could call it God or source, whatever label you want to give it, but it becomes very clear that the song is no longer being delivered by a human being, which I know sounds very crazy, but just try tuning into it yourself and you'll see. But I do want to say, you know, just be careful about thinking it's all about the artist. I'm not going to name any names because I don't know if he'd want me to, and some of y'all will know who I'm talking about, but I say that because way before I started making videos on this topic, there was someone in the community who to this day still believes that a specific artist is the reincarnation of Christ. And I'm not downplaying his channel or anything. I'm subscribed to his channel. I enjoy his videos. But basically, he's kind of made it all about the artist instead of something bigger that's using the artist as a means to get a message across. And I get it. Like, I get how someone could make the mistake of doing that. The transmissions can come through so strong sometimes that you can't help but feel the Christ consciousness. But don't think it's coming from the human artists themselves. None of them are Christ. It's the retrocausality language that's helping you to merge with the Christ consciousness waves that are rippling back to us from the future. But just make sure you're looking at the screen if you're not already, so you can see the lyric changes I highlighted as you're listening to it. And just use this time to slow down and take a break. You don't have to overthink and dissect every line. Just quiet your mind and focus on the feeling of God's love, and the messages will pop out naturally. So take a moment to clear your mind of all the distractions and negative thinking, and just focus on God's love. And really ask yourself, God, if you could send me a message or a sign through this song, what would you want to tell me about?
Think I'll write a different song. Got a feeling it might take a long time. Singing it over again, I can't recall just how it used to be. Voices across the sea. Will she come to company? Won't go till the sun comes up again. Gotta take the good with the bad. Sometimes I wish I never had my say. Always goes that way. Or is it just the way I feel today? Voices across the way. Will she come to me to keep me company? Won't go till the sun comes up again. 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 Won't go till the sun comes up again.
In my mind I'm gone to Carolina. Can't you see the sunshine? Can't you just feel the moonshine? And ain't it just like a friend of mine to hit me from behind? Yes, I'm gone to Carolina in my mind. Karen, she's a silver sun. You best walk her away and watch it shining. Watch her watch the morning come. A silver tear appearing now. I'm crying, ain't I? I'm gone to Carolina in my mind. There ain't no doubt in no one's mind that love's the finest thing around. Whisper something soft and kind. And hey babe, the sky's on fire. I'm dying, ain't I? Can't you see the sunshine? Can't you just feel the moonshine? Ain't it just like a friend of mine to hit me from behind? Guess I'm gone to Carolina in my mind. Well, dark and silent late last night, I think I might have heard the highway calling. Geese in flight and dogs that bite. Signs that might be omens say I'm going, I'm gone to Carolina in my mind. With a holy host of others standing around me, still I'm on the dark side of the moon. And it seems like it goes on like this forever. You must forgive me if I'm up and gone to Carolina in my mind. In my mind I'm gone to Carolina. Can't you see the sunshine? Can't you just feel the moonshine?